Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So I figured I'd give you an update on everything that's going on. There is so much happening now. Things are getting a little bit crazy. So I'm going to start off with updating you about how my husband's job interview went in Indiana last week. Okay, so as I mentioned, we got an offer to interview in person for a job in southern Indiana. And, it was interesting because this company did not offer to pay for our travel to go to Indiana to interview with them, which was a little bit discouraging, especially when, he's unemployed. Like, wouldn't that just be a natural thing to offer? But God, this is what I love. In those disappointing situations, God still showered some blessings upon us. I shouldn't even say some, the blessings were coming fast and furious. So instead of the total amount for our plane tickets being somewhere between $1,100 and $1,200, it ended up being just around $400 because we were able to use those credits that we had. Secondly, we ended up getting this unexpected discount on our Airbnb, so that was great. And then the third blessing was when we went to the counter for the rental car at the airport, they ended up giving us this free upgrade to a really nice pickup truck, which my husband was thrilled about. And I thought that was those were three really sweet winks we got from God, which was so appreciated. The interview itself went really, really well, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, my husband's he's just a brilliant guy. He knows his stuff. The schedule they were offering would have been 6 weeks on, 3 weeks off, or he could choose to work 3 weeks on and have 1 week off. So after the interview, he and I took some time to drive around the area. I mean, I talked about in the last video, just the hesitation with going to southern Indiana. And again, I love the Midwest. We love rural areas. We love the countryside. I just didn't really know what to expect. But I have to say, southern Indiana is gorgeous. We were in Jasonville, which is about an hour and a half west of Bloomington. And my goodness, the dogwood trees were gorgeous. They were in full bloom. There were so many deciduous trees. And to be honest, having lived in the National Forest now for 4 years, so we're surrounded by ponderosa pine, birch, and aspen. It was a real thrill to see oh my gosh, oak trees, maple trees, cherry trees, all sorts of different trees. Nothing was green because we're still on, obviously the cusp of winter, just getting right into spring, the beginnings of it. But you could just imagine wow, this is pretty countryside now. I can't imagine how much more beautiful this area looks in the spring, summer, and definitely the fall. Was really pleased to see just rolling countryside, those beautiful, gently rolling hills, lots of farmland. So all in all, it was a pleasant surprise. The other thing I loved was we found so many amazing restaurants to eat at. Just these great, mom and pop restaurants with homemade food. It was oh my gosh. It really, really went above and beyond my expectations. Beautiful, beautiful countryside. Here's where things started to get crazy. The night of the interview, it was probably 9 or 10 o'clock that evening. My husband got an email from this railroad based in Arizona. And then within a few hours, he got a text from a railroad based in eastern Wyoming asking if he would come in for an in-person interview the day we were to get back to South Dakota from our Indiana trip. So obviously at that point, it's oh my gosh, we literally went from 0 responses to all these applications he's been putting out to having 3 boom, 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 all drop into our lap. Oh, and then going back to the Indiana gig, when the interview ended, they said they would be taking about a week to 10 days to make their decision. So in the meantime, he says yes to having the interview with the railroad in Wyoming and also the railroad in Arizona. So fast forward, we are back home. My husband has this phone interview with this railroad based in Arizona. Everything they're saying that they need is right in line with my husband's resume, with his experience. And in fact, the woman hosting the interview kept saying to my husband, "You are a perfect fit. You're exactly what we need." The position itself sounds like it would have been quite a challenge, which I think would be ideal for my husband because it would really be an opportunity for his skill set to shine. I know he would go above and beyond what they're asking. So that in and of itself was exciting. And then, like I said, the whole area we would be in just looks absolutely gorgeous. When I think of Arizona, I just think, obviously like more desert areas. I know there's some greener areas, but I didn't realize wow, they have serious mountainous areas that are just absolutely stunning. These areas are 4-season. They might not get the amount of snow that we get up here in South Dakota, but they do get a little bit. Arizona to me looks like it's familiar in terms of all the things we love here in South Dakota, but then there's just a little bit of different, higher elevation, a little bit more intense mountains. So it's that element of excitement that makes it feel wow, we are literally moving potentially to bigger and better compared to what we already love and cherish here in South Dakota. So that was very appealing. So after this initial interview, the woman wanted to schedule a second phone interview with the general manager of this railroad and my husband. And that's when things started getting very strange. They had an incident that happened on the rail line, which was totally understandable, forcing them to reschedule the phone interview with the GM. And then after that, it was they started flaking out. They started saying oh yeah, we'll call you Monday to reschedule that interview. They'd never call. Then they scheduled an actual phone interview between the GM and my husband. My husband never got a call, never got an email, nothing about rescheduling. So my husband had just sent a follow-up email, very kindly just saying, hey, I just want to let you know I'm very interested, looking forward to moving ahead with the interview process. Then he'd get an email back saying, oh yes, we are too, you're the perfect candidate. And then they'd ghost him. So that was very discouraging because I think initially out of all 3 opportunities, well, if you get 3 offers, which one are you most excited about? Arizona was definitely at the top of his list. So, it's when you're being ghosted and the company's flaking out on you, not only is it discouraging, but then it's also a red flag. You think this isn't typical behavior. Certainly kind of gives you pause about what might await you on site should you make the move and accept an offer. So the Wyoming interview. As I mentioned, my husband, the day after we got back from our Indiana trip, drove 3 hours to Wyoming for an in-person interview. So the gig with this railroad would be for a conductor. My husband, the job he was just released from was a managerial position. He was pretty senior. However, obviously he started out as a conductor and just worked his way up. So he's kind of in a unique position where he has ties. He still has his conductor's card, so he is certified to operate a train. But then now he has the experience being on the managerial side at a much senior level. So this conductor gig is also interesting because the schedule would be 8 days on, 6 days off, which is pretty substantial. So my husband was making very good money in his managerial position for the railroad. But, when they give you this amazing number, it always looks good on paper, right? Because you're thinking, this is what you'll make with a 40-hour work week. However, as he found out, and I think most of us are familiar with, unfortunately, who works a 40-hour salaried week anymore these days? I think, unfortunately, it's become the norm where companies overwork their employees. Salaried employees are rarely clocking 40 hours a week. I mean, how many people do you know are constantly checking their emails after hours? They're checking their emails or working on the weekend. They're checking their emails, taking calls, working on their vacation, if they're even taking a vacation. And that certainly is what my husband found himself, the situation he found himself in. So when you take this amazing salary and then you start really analyzing it okay, well, based on the 80 hours I'm working, what am I truly making? So as an hourly employee with this Wyoming railroad, that means you're also eligible for overtime. So in this scenario, he'd get 40 hours a week, guaranteed work, plus 16 hours guaranteed overtime. Then you have the opportunity to voluntarily work any overtime above that at a rate of time and a half your normal rate. That's when you start seeing this massive jump in what your actual income would be. This obviously would be a much different change of pace for him, much different than being in a fast-paced managerial position. It basically would be starting out at the bottom. I have seen my husband in similar scenarios where he legit rises to the top so fast because he is just so brilliant. So I have zero doubts that we would see this playing out again, even if he were to take this position in Wyoming. So in the meantime, my own job search really has been pretty discouraging. I mentioned before, I've been sending out resumes. If I even get a response, it's a rejection. But blessings are still happening for sure. As I mentioned previously, the work I'm doing at my current company shifted from something super hyper creative, soul satisfying to basically just data entry related to AI, which is super mind numbing. However, on Monday, our little team of hyper creatives is being put on a different project that to me initially sounds and looks way more interesting and fulfilling. So I'm excited about that. I also have been in constant contact with some of my former managers who have moved on to bigger and better at my company. I have great relationships with all of them. I've had super encouraging conversations with them. One in particular offered to send my creative portfolio to her network of people within the company to see if she can get me into a more creative position. So how am I feeling at this point about all this craziness that's going on? Because there's a lot that's going on. I'm torn. I've noticed a pattern with me, both in Indiana and Wyoming on those trips. Initially, I'm able to go into them with a very open mind. I remain positive and hopeful and excited. By the time the trip's over, I want to get home, first and foremost. I want to run away from the situation completely. I want it to go away. And I also notice that hopeful, positive feeling shifts to just a sadness, if I'm being honest. Sad, feeling overwhelmed, thinking what is happening? Why is this happening? And really struggling, like I said, I don't even want to say struggling, working hard to keep those understandable feelings, those negative emotions under control, right? I mentioned before that one of my goals in this process is to stay steady, not only for my husband as an example, because he doesn't have the faith I have, which continue praying. Thank you so much for all your prayers. Keep at it. God has cracked tougher nuts before. I absolutely believe my husband can come into a relationship with God. So I'm trying to stay steady for him as an example. This is what trust and faith looks like in God when your world is shaking and when you're scared and when you don't understand. You can still choose to have a positive, hopeful mindset and stay rooted in faith and trust that God knows what he's doing. I'm also doing that for my mental health because, again, looking back on how I was feeling internally at the end of the Indiana trip and the Wyoming trip, I was very close to a meltdown. I'm not going to lie. Internally, I was just legit praying with my heart and soul to God, Lord, help me keep my focus on you. Help me keep my focus on you. Do not let me have a meltdown right now, because a meltdown was feeling really appealing. I just want to melt down. I just want to in front of my husband, get it all out. Not to say that there aren't times where meltdowns aren't therapeutic. They're needed. They're warranted. There's nothing wrong with them. I just felt like this is not going to be productive. This is going to be destructive. So trying to just, Jesus, I need you right now, like in a big, big way. Staying keyed into God, and also knowing when it's time for me to get quiet. When I start to feel overwhelmed, I have learned from experience the best thing for me to do is to get quiet. I need to get with God. I need to just not make decisions. I need to not talk, because I want to be very careful about the words I'm putting out into my husband's ear, into my ear, into the universe. I want to be very careful of that. Again, not sugarcoating, not trying to like Pollyanna the situation, but just being very thoughtful about your thoughts and intentional about your words, and understanding that words, as the Bible says, contain life or death. And I always want my words to be authentic and real, but also to skew towards, containing life and hope and positivity. So thankfully, my husband has learned to give me that quiet time. I think he can tell when I'm overstimmed, I'm overwhelmed, and I just need to like really close in and just be quiet. And I'm so grateful that he lets me do that, because every time it's like I'm given that opportunity to be quiet, I spend that time internally talking to God nonstop. He has been hearing from me like legit every minute of the day. But then the next morning, I wake up refreshed with a great night of sleep, ready to talk about the situation. And again, I think that this is one of those classic scenarios where we have an A to B scenario, right? We are at point A. To me, the path to point B seems very clear. And I think that's when you start to question God, like, well, Lord, you could very easily make like this, that, and thus happen to get us on this smooth path to point B, right? But we've seen that the Lord rarely does this. Why? I think oftentimes it's a test of faith. As I've said before, it's kind of hard and counterproductive to run around telling the world you're a Christian, and then you have just a meltdown when you come into times that require faith and trust. And again, not saying we're not entitled to experience all those emotions, which are totally normal. And I think God expects, I'm not superhuman. I'm a human being. He knows I'm going to feel overwhelmed, scared, anxious, sad, angry. All that's expected. But I think what he expects out of me at this point is to be able to manage those emotions, to turn to him when I start to feel that negativity starting to take over my brain, to just lean into him, take a minute, and again, take it step by step. Tomorrow has enough worries of its own, right? Like, let's focus on today. Let's make decisions based on the information we have now. Yes, it's always good to prepare. Sure, look at different scenarios, gather information so you can make good decisions, but don't get too caught up in tomorrow. Do not get too caught up in the what if scenarios, because you have no way of knowing what's coming your way tomorrow. I definitely don't. And this whole situation and my husband losing his job unexpectedly has been like a case in point. I think of that lesson that God always wants us to keep top of mind. At the end of the day, this has happened for a reason. I do believe in God's promise that he works everything out for our good. The hard part is just trusting, in the process of, okay, we're not going from A to B on this smooth, like really enjoyable path. It's probably going to zigzag a little bit, and there's going to be hills and valleys, but eventually just holding on to that belief that we will come out bigger and better than we ever could have imagined. Staying keyed into all the ways God is blessing us, those wonderful and sweet winks. So I'm trying to stay, like I said, focused on that, keeping the negative emotions at check, but also allowing myself the grace to process them and to not feel like I have to be some superhuman who doesn't experience fear, anxiety, worry, anger, sadness at the potential of moving from this dream area in which we live. I know this video is getting kind of long, but I will close with this. I don't often have attachment to things. In fact, it's kind of like a family joke that I am like big on garage sale purges, and I will purge like family treasures. It's weird. I don't have an attachment to things. I have a strong attachment to creation. And for me, that means a strong attachment to the land around which we live. So I mentioned before, I love hiking. When I say hiking, I'm literally like out the door into millions of acres of protected national forest. We live sandwiched between two mountain lakes, one of which I can walk to. I go kayaking in this lake all the time. This is a very like just beautiful, magical, amazing, soul satisfying, lovely area that I adore. I can't express that. There are no words to express how much I love living where we are. I love creation. I love being surrounded by trees. I love the mountains. I just love everything about it. And so for me, that's been the hard thing, right? Like I talked about before, if we sell the house, presumably that would set us up to live debt-free for the rest of our lives. We don't have student loan debt. We don't have credit card debt. We have a mortgage and 2 car payments. Those would all get paid off, and realistically, we could buy a house with cash. We like living modestly. I have no interest in like buying a McMansion. To me, the dream scenario is to have like a super cute little cozy 1,000 square foot cabin on a big tract of land. That could be that dream coming true. And I'm saying all this because I'm becoming aware of the fact that sometimes when God wants to hand you a blessing and a gift, it requires you to release what you're holding on to, right? Like, I can't accept the blessing if I'm preoccupied and too busy clenching what I'm afraid to let go of. So that's something I'm working on, and I would appreciate prayers for that as I work through that. But ultimately, my ask to you is keep us in prayer. Wisdom, first and foremost, that's what I want more than anything. I want wisdom. As I said, keep praying for my husband's salvation for sure. And to me, there's comfort in that. So, as I said before, this video is probably so dang long at this point. Thank you for hanging in there. There's just been a lot going on that I wanted to catch you up with. But in any event, thank you guys so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you're having a good one, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.